Okay, everybody, welcome. We are grateful to have you here. I am most appreciative to have you coming to this session and for joining us in this webinar. Now, here's how the deal works. If you haven't been to our webinars before, I'm going to talk for between 50 and 60 minutes, so approximately an hour. And then we're going to have a half an hour. I know some of you have to jump off after the hour, no problem. But if you want to hang around and are able to, you can stay around for some questions, some dialogue, some reflections, where you get a chance to ask the group some questions, ask me some questions. We can have a good conversation. So it's a pleasure to be here, and let's get going. Ordinarily, Kristen introduces me, but she is unable to be with us today, so I am going solo, although my Vice President of Client Care, Marg Barr, is here. Many of you have had relationships with Marg, who is, I'm sure you have been well taken care of, and Marg will be putting some links in and making a connection with you. So if you have any technical challenges, just direct them to Marg through the chat room, any challenges whatsoever. And if they're insurmountable, then she will stop me and I will help address them. So this just came to me this morning. I like to start off with a little humor. I have reached the higher plane of consciousness and enlightenment. Can you send me a link for that crazy world we live in? All right. Well, folks, we just came out of an academy last week, and I just want to say, I know we've got a few members of the academy here with us. We just had an incredible week last week, at least I did, with some amazing leaders from all levels of organizations and all walks of life. And I just want to be really transparent with you that one of my main primary reasons, other than to give you some content and share my message with you, is to let you know about the upcoming academy and invite you to join us if you really want to get into this material deeper. I know that we've got some people here that were there last week. We still have, if anybody is still interested, we have a virtual academy next week we still have seats available for that. And then our next in-person academy will be April 23rd to 26th. And you can get all the content on that on my website. So let's get going. I'm going to share with you, I'm going to start about accountability. I'm going to share with you what my agreement is to you. I'm going to make this material relevant, reflective, and real. I will make accountability inspiring. Very often, very rarely, I will say it this way, accountability inspires us. Most of the time when people walk around saying, we got to be more accountable around here, usually it means we're going to point the finger at people and blame people and punish people. It tends not to be very inspiring. So I will promise to make it inspiring. I will be open for your feedback and to learn. Now, obviously, we won't have a dialogue during my presentation, but I am open for your feedback and learning afterwards if you can stay around for that extra half an hour. I will be respectful and create a safe place for you to learn. So if I say anything that is perceived as disrespectful, unrespectful, is that a word? Disrespectful. It will be unintentional, and I am very open to hear from you afterwards, either directly in the chat room, or directly in the in-person meeting or in the conversation that we have afterwards in the question and answer, or you can feel free to email me via Marg and give me any feedback, and we will have time for questions and dialogue to apply to learning. Now, with all agreements require a support requirement. So this is what I'm going to ask from you: to bring an open mind and a heart, to extend trust, and to challenge me and be direct. And again, there will be that opportunity to do that. Okay, now here's the consequences. See, without consequence, you can't have accountability. So I always start with positive consequences, which is I will give you, what will come out of this is that you'll receive a renewed perspective on accountability and an increased awareness of how it impacts every aspect of your life and your work. You'll have a better understanding of personal responsibility that will lead to better self-respect and better mental health. I got to tell you, I struggled in the 90s when I started to first do this work around accountability. I struggled with mental health challenges, particularly depression. And I had no idea how this was going to impact in a positive way my mental health by teaching about accountability. So this is going to be very deeply personal, and it will be very relevant to your life. This isn't just a transactional technique process that you can apply into your organization for better performance management. You can use it for that. But I'm going to tell you, this will impact the foundation of a good life. I'll give you increased skills at preventing frustrations downstream. So I'm not having you ever been frustrated with a person who does not keep their promises, isn't accountable. I will show you some skills at how to, those are downstream problems when we're dealing with it. But what my premise is, you got to deal with some upstream opportunities, and that's what we'll be focused on today. But we'll also deal with some downstream problems when they occur. And I'll give you a practical accountability process that will lead to a higher level of personal and organizational excellence. That's what we're going to come out of here with. All right. Having said that, let me give you just a little bit of a story of where I come from. Most of you have heard me before. Well, this will be a review. Certainly those folks that were in the academy last week, this will be a review. But for those of you who haven't met me before, my first work around accountability started in the 80s when I was a family therapist. And I was working with troubled families. And I was teaching parents in those days how to raise accountable kids. And what ended up happening was that I ended up getting business executives to my parenting talks. And they invited me to come into their company and said, you know, everything you taught these families, we could adapt it in our organization. We'd love you to come in and give the same principles and the same practices and processes to our company and our organizations. I had no idea what I was doing in those days. It's called consulting, right? And I'd go into these companies and take what I learned about families and adapt it into organizations. And something in me really woke up, and I said, you know what, I'm going to make a profession out of teaching accountability inside of organizations. So I went into business with a couple of organizational development consultant guys in the 1980s. And we wrote this book with, I wrote this book with Bruce Klatt and Sean Murphy in Calgary. And if you were in the oil patch in the 90s, top 10 oil companies in Calgary, you'd have used our accountability process. This is really what launched my career. But what happened, we spent 10 years teaching companies how to build accountability. It was my philosophy and it was their tool and it was their process. But I learned so much about organizations and business working with these guys. But what ended up happening is we really separated, because I really felt that the whole accountability process at that time was very transactional. It was kind of check the box. It was a great practical process, but there was something missing. So I started to do some research in the early 2000s. And what I began to understand is that we needed to integrate accountability into this thing called authenticity, which has become, in the last 20 years of my career, really my signature work, which is authenticity. And what I suggest is that we connect, my whole premise is to connect authenticity with accountability. Then you really get a full realization of your potential. And I do want to give, I think Jim may be on the call. I know he's registered for this. And if you can stick around afterwards, Jim, it'd be great to have you on the call, but or at least to hear your voice. We wrote this book back in the early 2000s called Bridges of Trust, where I began to integrate accountability into authenticity and make it transformational rather than just transactional. So I give Jim a great deal of credit for much of my learning and expression of accountability today, and particularly as it relates to authenticity. And then I have since integrated all of that work into this book, that Other Everest, Navigating Pathway to Authentic Leadership. All right, so that's kind of my story, my backstory. Now, here's what I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you the 4 pillars of accountability. And this is really, don't miss the boat on this, because if you just go to the agreement process without the philosophical underpinnings, you're going to miss accountability. You really have to integrate these 4 pillars together. Accountability is the foundation of your life. It's not your life. Nobody wants to be on their headstone that they got all their emails returned and that they were an accountable person. But without accountability, you don't have a life. You don't want to, nobody here takes pride in telling people about their beautiful foundation in their house. If you may have a beautiful home, but you're not going to have that home without the foundation. And that's where I say accountability is really the foundation of our life. It's the foundation of our organization, and it has to be there to make a good life. But you don't live to be accountable. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. So first of all, you got to be clear. What is the philosophy? So there's a philosophical underpinning of accountability. What's the personal responsibility? There's a mindset, an attitude of accountability. I always say, if you want to build an accountable organization, the best way to build it is to hire accountable people. It's really hard to teach that mindset if people don't come into your workplace with it. There's a whole hiring process to make sure that you get a personal responsibility attitude when you hire people. Then there's the relationship component. And I'm going to argue that we have treated employees like children. We've had a parent-child relationship for probably since the Industrial Revolution. And we really, my big push is to turn employees into partners, team members into full-fledged partnerships rather than employees. And then I'm going to leave you the practical agreement process. If we have time, I'll share with you a couple of examples. I've got an example, for example, of what we did with my teachers, with my kids when they were little, and using the accountability process for enriching and building a partnership there. Anyway, let's go through these one at a time. Let's talk about the philosophy first of all. First of all, leadership on the human side is always a balance. Leadership in the home, leadership on a board, leadership in an organization is always a balance. Do I support people or do I push people? And every day we have to ask that question. And don't ever support people when they need to be pushed, but don't push people when they need to be supported. And you never quite know, but it's a continual struggle of self-awareness and application here. And if you've known me, if you've sat through any of my webinars before, you know that I'm big on relationships. I'm big on the support part. It's a necessary component. As I say, you got to expect before you got to connect before you expect. So I'm big on the support part, but today we're going to talk about the push part, the demand part. You got to still, you can't build an organization on, oh, we love each other, we're engaged, we trust each other, there's high degree of trust and engagement and passion, but we're not getting any work done. Well, that's not going to cut it. So we're going to deal with the demand side. And I'm going to argue it's really actually not a push demand side. What it really ultimately is clarity. It's if you begin to look at where have you come up against some accountability challenges before, chances are it has to do with you weren't clear about expectations, you weren't clear about consequences, you weren't clear about what people needed for support, and you weren't really clear on what you needed from people. And then we tend to blame people for being unaccountable when in fact we need to look in the mirror and say, where can I be more clear in terms of my expectations? All right. Having said that, I'm going to give you a clear definition of accountability. You are welcome to borrow my definition. You're welcome to make your own. But folks, we talk about accountability like kids should be more accountable, teachers should be more accountable, parents should be more accountable, government should be more accountable. It's probably the most unaccountable statement we could make. It's a lot easier, by the way, to see a lack of accountability in other people than it is to see it in ourselves. It's a lot easier to see it in a politician than it is to look in the mirror and say, hey, look at where did I not keep a promise? Okay, so anyway, I'm going to give you, that's my definition. I learned it on the farm growing up. You shake a hand and you can be counted on. Now, why care about being counted on? It's an interesting question. Why care about being accountable? Why does it matter in life, in leadership? Well, first of all, it's the foundation of a well-lived life. It is absolutely, without accountability, you don't have a life. And I'm just going to share with you, I can't talk about accountability without mentioning my parents, because this is where the seeds of accountability were ultimately planted. And I suspect they were planted there in you. What did your parents do to foster this sense of being able to be counted on? And I tell you, my parents worked 20 years at this. And then I spent 20 years of life, and it really wasn't until I started to actually teach this stuff in my 40s that it actually started to sink in what my parents were teaching me for 20 years. They'll model it, they can teach it, that generation knew it, but now we have to live it. And then you get involved in life, and that's the integration of actually learning what it means to be accountable. Here's 8 things I learned from my parents. If you want to raise accountable kids, poverty isn't a requirement, but it helps. Don't be giving everything to your kids. It will not foster accountability. Don't ever make a promise you don't intend to keep. You can't build a reputation on what you're going to do. See all blame as a waste of time. Actually, that's really a line I learned from Jim. The day that Jim Regrade, the day that you decide once and for all that all blame is a waste of time, your life will be changed forever. Nobody but you cares about the reason you let somebody down. They care that you got let down. You can go on all kinds of excuses, but it's a blah, blah, blah conversation because the fact is you let somebody down. Let's take ownership for it. Turn off the lights when you leave the building. You can tell the leaders when they leave the building because they'll watch and they'll look around and say, you know what, let's turn off the lights. If you've got kids at home, they're not likely turning off the lights because they've yet to be accountable. Do more than you get paid for. The most important contributions you make in this world will not come with a paycheck. And finally, and I learned this as a Boy Scout in the scouting program, make the world a better place than you found it. Leave the world a better place. I learned that, you know, when you make a campfire, you build a campsite, leave the campsite cleaner and in better condition than when you found it. These are the lessons that I learned. And, you know, it'd be interesting. We could have a long discussion. It's a good, you know, I would invite you to go back to your teams and as a team, take 10 minutes and talk about how do we learn to be accountable? You know, accountability is one of our values around here. What does it mean to be accountable to you folks? And how did you learn? How did your parents teach you this? Give us some stories about how they taught you this. I remember we were hiking with my dad once. He was our scoutmaster, and we'd be kicking these rocks. We hiked up this long, high mountain, and we'd be kicking rocks, getting a big kick out of this as teenagers. And he walked up to us and says, you know what, guys, you got to be aware. I know you're having fun today, but you know, those rocks are falling back on the trail that we just came up, and just be aware those rocks are going to hurt somebody if you don't stop doing that. And then he just turned and walked away. And that conversation has stuck with me for, I don't know, 50 plus years. So what stories do you have? Let's tell the stories. How did you learn to be accountable? What did you learn from your parents? And start bringing it into your organization, the conversation about what we learned to be accountable. So, folks, make a list of everybody in your life. This is why you need to care about accountability. Make a list of everybody in your life that you can count on. And, you know, I've had a hard time sometimes with groups coming up with 5 people on their list. Now ask yourself, reflect on what it's like to be around people who, when they say they're going to do something, you can count on it. They don't ever make a promise they don't intend to keep. And once they say they'll do it, yeah, that project's handled. Think about what it's like. It's energetic. There's self-respect there, right? Reflect on ways you may want to consider showing greater appreciation for the people in your life who are accountable. I always say it's a lot more effective and powerful and impactful to build accountability, folks, with a flashlight rather than a stick. You don't beat accountability into people. You shine a light on it. You foster it. You make it difficult to be unaccountable. You bring it into the awareness in your meetings, okay? People won't be accountable until they have a compelling reason to be. So if you've got an accountability issue in your team, and you're wondering how to help somebody be more accountable, you're not going to get there with a stick making them be more accountable. What you got to do is find a compelling reason. I'm going to show you a little video here. Many of you have been in my programs. You've seen this video, but I'm going to put it in a different context than you probably have seen it before. This is a Christmas video, so with the season coming up, it'll be a bit seasonal here. But here's what I want you to watch for. It's an elderly gentleman, and I want you to watch for the shift in his mental health when he gets a compelling reason. And with that compelling reason, he will be accountable because the reason compels him to be accountable. You show up in the world when you have a compelling reason. And I want you to watch the shift in his mental health by accountability and how accountability impacted how he felt about himself. Now, there's lots of other things to watch for, but that's what I would like you to focus on as you watch this. probably watched that video 100 times and I still get choked up. But I want you to notice the energy, that accountability. And, you can say it's the exercise that gave him some endorphins there, but I'm going to suggest it's about integrity. It's about keeping a promise, having a vision and keeping a promise. My dad used to say, when we'd wake up in the morning and I'd be, he was my track coach in college or in high school, and he'd wake me up. And if I wasn't out of bed in 5 minutes, he'd be in my bedroom, and he would say, he inspired me to train, to have a vision to train for the Canadian Olympic team. And it wasn't that I was getting up to exercise. It was, I was getting up to train for the Olympics. And, he always had a statement that, that a purpose of a dream is not to achieve your dream, but instead to inspire you to become the kind of person that it takes to achieve your dream. So what he's suggesting is, at 6 o'clock in the morning, if you've made up your mind, you're going to get up and make an agreement with yourself to exercise. What happens when you put your feet on the floor, whether you feel like it or not, and you keep a promise to yourself? If you can't keep a promise to yourself, you won't build respect around you. And when you keep a promise to yourself, it bolsters your self-worth, your self-respect, which builds self-respect around you. Notice how accountable you are to yourself. Can you be counted on to keep a promise to yourself? My dad would always say it's mind over mattress at 6 o'clock in the morning. Now, if there's any engineers on this call, you will understand this thing called structural integrity. What I've learned from engineers over the years is that engineering has a very high standard in this culture and in our society today. And if you know an engineer in your life, give them a hug, because our life would cease to exist as we know it if it weren't for the high standards of professional engineers. So there's this thing called structural integrity, which is the ability of a structure to support a designed load without breaking or collapsing. It assures that the structure will perform its designed function. And so that's what structural integrity is. And I'm going to suggest that relational integrity in our life and moral integrity does the same thing for us. And if we don't have integrity, our lives won't uphold the loads that we are confronted with in life. And this will impact our mental health if you can't be counted on. So the 8 steps of accountability: take 100% responsibility, no excuses. Be clear about what you expect from others, both at an attitudinal perspective, behavioral perspective, and an operational perspective. And if you aren't, so if you pass along an email and say, I need this done by 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon, a request is not an agreement. A request is, I need to follow it up and make sure I get an agreement. Can we both agree to what this project looks like at 4 o'clock in the afternoon? Turn all expectation conversations into clear agreements. There's probably 3 kinds of conversations. There's entertaining conversations that we just sit and have fun together, having good conversations. There's learning conversations, which is what you're engaged in at this point. And then there's expectation conversations, where I have an expectation from you to come out of this conversation. And don't ever end an expectation conversation without a clear agreement. But think carefully before you make an agreement. Only make agreements you know you will honor. Ask yourself, do you have the willingness, the desire, the resources? Make agreements very carefully. But once you make an agreement, be impeccable about keeping promises and write your agreements down. I carry this little black book around with me. And every time I make an agreement, it goes in here. And then and at the end of the day, when I plan out my next day, it'll go into my day timer. And have a recovery process. And I won't want to spend a lot of time on this, but life happens. We can't keep an agreement. Let your creditor know as soon as you know if your agreement has been jeopardized. Negotiate with your creditor at this point to minimize damages. Hey, listen, I ran into a problem with keeping my agreement with this. This is what happened. I will make it, recommit to a new agreement, and I'll learn from the experience so that it doesn't happen again. Okay. All right. That's the clarity piece, kind of the philosophy piece. Now we're going to talk about personal responsibility, the mindset, the attitude piece. Okay. And I want to suggest that all people are oriented toward one of two things. They're oriented more toward the external, or they're oriented more toward an internal, an external orientation versus an internal orientation. The outcome in an external orientation of events in your life are determined by outside factors. In an internal orientation, the outcome of events in your life are determined by your attitude and your actions. So let me just give you a few illustrations of this. I was out on the East Coast sailing a couple of summers ago, and with some good friends. And here's what I learned. The pessimist complains about the wind. The optimist expects it to change, but the leader adjusts the sails. Now, this is a poem that was written by Ella Wheeler Wilcox that illustrates the difference between an internal orientation and an external orientation. Ella Wheeler Wilcox, to put this into context, wrote this poem in 1916. People in those days were more oriented toward the internal because they didn't have so many consumer items to look after themselves and make life easy, so that they were tougher. I'm not saying we want to go back to the good old days, but as we opened our hearts to each other and got developed relationships, then we end up giving too much support, and we orient our next generation into an external orientation. And I'll explain this as I go along. One ship sails east and another west by the same set winds that blow. 'Tis the set of the sails, not the gales, that tells you the way we go. Like the winds of the sea are the waves of time as we journey along through life. 'Tis the set of the soul that determines the goal, and not the calm or the strife. So this is an internal orientation, regardless of the waves, regardless of the wind. You're guiding it. It's the set of the sails. It's the set of the soul that determines your outcome. It's been said that a bird sitting on a branch, never afraid of the branch breaking. It's because her trust is not in the branch, but it's in her wings. So nature has an internal orientation because nobody makes it easy for this bird. This bird has to make it on her own. And so nobody walks along and parents this bird to say, don't worry, I'm going to look after you. I'm going to make life easy for you. And we're just going to make it a strong branch for you. No, the bird develops her own strength from within. My dad taught me this as the Canadian gymnastics champion. And I had polio when I was 4, and he never felt sorry for me. He took me down in the basement, and we built these parallel bars in the basement. This is my favorite picture of my dad. He used to walk around the house on his hand when he was 50 years old. I didn't think there was anything unusual about that till we had friends come over and said, that's pretty cool. But my dad would take me down in the basement, and he would lift me up on these parallel bars. And he said, don't pray for the world to get easier. Pray instead for you to get stronger. He had an internal orientation to say a personal responsibility. Don't you go blaming the world. Don't expect the world to change. You have to change. This is an internal orientation. So I'll give you a couple of practical examples on this. Here's a pen. I'm going to ask you to ask a dumb question. Why does that pen fall? Well, from an external orientation, it falls because of gravity. Now, an external orientation is correct, but if you don't blame me, the pen fell because of gravity, versus an internal orientation that said it fell because I let it go. I dropped it. Why are you late for a meeting? The number one reason. Now, by the way, can you be accountable and still be late for a meeting? Of course. Sometimes accountable people are late for meetings, but watch the reason why they say they're late for a meeting. This will, and when you begin to orient yourself, or at least familiarize yourself with this orientation, you begin to see the level of external orientation that we turn people into victims, because we create victims by expecting the world to change for us. Why are you late for a meeting? The number one reason people say they're late for a meeting is because of traffic. Don't blame me. blame the 250,000 people that are on the road that conspired to make me late for this meeting, versus an internal orientation, which says, I did not anticipate the traffic this morning and I left late and I'm going to learn from it. That's an internal orientation. Why do you get a cold? Well, you're not going to get a cold if there's not germs, but I can throw a bunch of germs into an audience and not everybody's going to get a cold. So an internal orientation says, I got a cold because I have a decreased immune system. Watch how people complain from an external, any complaining is an external orientation. Somebody didn't do it for me. It broke. If you've got kids in your life, they won't admit that they broke it. They'll say it broke because they're little and adults are big, and it's called a survival mechanism. It's appropriate for a 4-year-old to say it broke. Kids are not born accountable. You got to learn to be accountable. But what we see is 40-year-olds still in that mindset that it's broke. It got spilled. Kids won't admit to spilling their milk. I didn't spill it. It got spilled. It got delayed. It's too hard. No, it's not too hard. You're not capable. That's the reason why you can't get it done. Okay, there's nothing wrong with saying I'm not capable, but an internal orientation will gear you to that. An external orientation says it's the problem outside of ourselves. It got lost. Don't blame me, the file got lost. We have not passed that subtle line between childhood and adulthood until we move from the passive voice to the active voice. That is until we stop saying it got lost and say, I lost it. This is about growing up. And we have a lot of 50-year-old children walking around the world. I love this notion. I adapted it from Peter Bloch's work, a beautiful book, by the way, The Structure of Belonging, the difference between a consumer and a citizen. A consumer believes that their needs are satisfied by other people's actions. They wait for the elected officials, for managers, for public servants. Government's not doing their job. Somebody else isn't doing their job, versus a citizen. Rather than waiting for or expecting others to meet their needs, they choose to be accountable for the well-being of the whole. Consumerism will lead, and it's interesting, we call this a consumer society, entitlement and blame, versus a citizen, which is about gratitude and service. And it's about making that stand. We institutionally deny the fact that each of us, through our perceptions and our choices, is actually creating the culture and the leadership that we so enjoy complaining about. Next time you find yourself complaining about our government, just ask yourself, what's your part of the deal? Because who is this government? We're all in this together. Deciding that I have created the world around me and therefore I am the one to step into healing it is the ultimate act of accountability. All right. For those of you who are familiar with the Q12 index, these are the predictors. This is the Gallup research has given 12 predictors of high engagement in organization. It's public domain. They have 2 million people on their database to verify these 12 factors. And this is a sample of 7 of the 12 factors. Do you know what's expected of your work? In the last 7 days, have you received recognition or praise for doing good work? Does your supervisor or someone at work seem to care about you as a person? Does the mission and purpose of your organization make you feel like your job is important? Is there somebody at work who encourages? Do you have a best friend at work? In the last year, have you had the opportunity to learn to grow? Nothing wrong with these questions. If you're a manager, these are typical employee engagement surveys. But here's my problem with these questions. They're good questions. They need to be on a survey. But here's what's missing: is that this is an external orientation. If you begin to see the underlying implication here in all of these is somebody else is going to do it for you. The boss has to make it good for you. The boss creates the culture. And so what we have done is we've turned these around and included these. And I believe that in any employment engagement survey, these questions need to be integrated into the survey. Have you clarified with your leader what's expected? In the last 7 days, have you given recognition or praise to your colleagues? Does your supervisor or someone at work know that you care about them as a person, or someone at work that you encourage in their development? Does your own personal purpose make you feel that your job is important? Have you taken time to create a good friendship? In the last year, have you created opportunities to learn and to grow? Folks, this is an internal orientation. This is an accountability orientation. that says, you know what? Yes, my boss has some accountabilities, but you know what? My boss, it's not up to my boss to create this culture. We're in this together. I want to be a citizen here. Okay. All right. I happen to have great respect for this man as a leader, and I've watched what he's done and read quite extensively. And I want to give you a quote at the early part of this horrible war. And I want you to watch the internal orientation that Zelensky had. When asked what impact the pace of armed deliveries had on his people and whether more lives could have been saved if the help had come sooner, Zelensky turned introspective. Very often we look for answers in someone else, but I often look for answers in myself. Did we do enough to get them? He said of the weapons. Did we do enough for these leaders to believe in us? Did we do enough? He then paused and shook his head. Are we the best for this place and this time? Who knows? I don't know. You question yourself, he said. This is an internal orientation, an accountability, a self-responsible orientation to the world. And this is what inspires action, is when we take accountability, not blame, but accountability and ownership for what we need to get in our world and what we're contributing to this planet. My mother left this in her will, in a journal rather, after she passed, that we found when we went through her will, and she went through, by the way, she spent all my inheritance. So I got the character and values, but I didn't get any money, but I got something worth way more than money. I got her character and values. I don't have any right to that inheritance. And what she left here is the ultimate challenge in our upbringing. Are we the product of our upbringing? No. From an external orientation, you say, I'm the product of my upbringing. I am who I was, you know, in my where my upbringing was. An internal orientation says, no, I'm the product of my perceptions and my choices of my upbringing. My mother said it this way: every parent, no matter how hard they try, will be both a blessing and a curse to their children. My hope is that my children will appreciate the blessing, if not immediately, then later in life. And perhaps more importantly, that they will take the curse and, like an oyster, irritated by a grain of sand over time, use it as a catalyst to build layers of character and understanding, thus producing a pearl. That is the work of an internal orientation, self-responsibility, regardless of what's happened in your past. Take that pain and turn it into a pearl. That's an orientation toward the internal. George Bernard Shaw, the great Irish playwright, said and philosopher at the age of 93, said it this way: this is the true joy of life. The being used for a purpose, recognized by yourself as a mighty one. The being a force of nature, instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. So how do you foster this? Well, in my longer term programs in our academies, we get into some coaching skills about how you coach people out of the victim box, and how you really begin to build a culture of ownership and personal responsibility that are internally oriented rather than this blaming external orientation. All right. My number 3 point is about partnerships. And this is the point that I want to make around this. And I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. I'd love to have some more conversations about this. Is that we have a parent-child contract that's been going around for decades in our organizations. It's why we've needed unions to take care of children, because we've had such bad parents. And so this whole notion of a parent-child relationship is instilled in us. And the basic contract is, I'll play nice and you take care of me until you can't. So the outdated employment contract says, if you do as you're told, score high on performance evaluations, be available now 24/7, do your job plus somebody else's, we'll give you job security until we can't. We'll give you a competitive salary and benefits. We'll give you an evaluation of 1 to 10 of how pleased we are with you. We'll give you promotional opportunities. We'll give you a good culture. This is the old contract, folks. And it's, if you can begin to just get a feel for the parent-child relationship here. So how do we turn that into a partnership? Well, here's the partnering contract. Clarify expectations and mutual agreements to each other. Create value and deliver agreed upon results. Keep your promises. Keep learning and growing. Take responsibility for your own security. It is my belief that organizations cannot be responsible for a person's security. That's an external orientation, and it's a parent-child relationship. I will make it easy for you by giving you job security. That is an illusion. There is no security in nature. And a internal orientation is to say, no, I don't depend on my employer to give me job security. My job security comes from my employability. I can work in many organizations. I can go get a job somewhere else. And I'm secure with myself because I'm employable. That's an internal orientation. Then we'll clarify expectations. We'll create a safe place for you to work in. And it is on an organization, on leaders in an organization to create a safe place to work in, but not necessarily job security. I'm not justifying walking around firing people randomly and treating them with abuse. But I'm saying, we would be dumb to build a culture based on that. But, if you have to lay somebody off, you better have tears in your eyes when you have to lay somebody off. It's painful to have to lay somebody off. But I'm saying, let's start that contract early on to say, we'll make it a safe place here, but I can't promise you job security. Do we have the courage to say that to people? We'll keep our promises. We'll co-create with you a remarkable culture, and we'll co-create a space for you to contribute and to grow and to be your best self. In the parental model, security comes from outside of ourselves. It's that external orientation. You will always breed entitlement. If you're seeing entitlement in your organizations, in your bureaucracies, we'll see blame. We'll see a culture of complaint, a regression toward adolescence. People end up being like kids, self-centered, and politics are paramount. Security comes from within. It's safe and caring. There's ownership and personal responsibility, service over self-interest, high trust, energy, and engagement, and minimal politics. Okay. Now I want to say about a performance review. In the parental model, it's one way. And you have a performance review, an evaluation, an appraisal system. First of all, the whole notion of supervision. We have supervisors in organizations. That's built on decades of a parent-child relationship. What one person in this call wants to be supervised? You don't supervise adults. You supervise children. And it's so ingrained in us. And these appraisal systems, if there's one thing you take away from this presentation, and anybody's heard me talk about this before, get rid of the numbers. Get rid of the numbers. You have no right to evaluate anybody based on some kind of scale between 1 and 10. What right do we have? By the way, any system that you use at work, go home and use it with your spouse or significant other. If you wouldn't use it with your spouse, don't use it at work. What marriage or significant relationship would last if you go home and start evaluating your spouse on a scale of 1 to 10? Now, you could be evaluate me, but I have no right to evaluate you on a scale of 1 to 10. It's irresponsible and it's parental. And you get complaints and punishment and avoidance, and you end up wanting to fix people, and it's annual, and I'm going to hold you accountable. A partnership says it's one way. We're going to give honest, respectful feedback, clear expectations and trust, growth opportunities, consequences. Don't rescue people from consequences. We fit people. It's ongoing, and we hold each other accountable. Now, again, you have to have the right mindset to come into this. You have to have you got to hire the right people, because if you've got an immature, dependent mindset, it's going to take us some time to work out of this old. It's going to take a generation. And I suspect, our whole compensation, I was just given this feedback the other day. I was given a presentation on Monday. It's what about our whole compensation system that's based on numbers? Folks, that's a childhood perspective. Compensation should be private, confidential, and we negotiate what's the compensation for this in an adult to adult relationship. Shouldn't be based on numbers. But again, in a parental model, we all have to be fair. It's got to be equal. It's got to be the same. Folks, the only fairness, how many of you have ever had children complain that life isn't fair? And you know what? when you grow up, guess what you learn? Life isn't fair. Now, it's got to be respectful, it's got to be safe, but you can't guarantee fairness in an adult to adult relationship. That's going to take a generation, but I'm doing my part to move the needle here. All right. Finally, you have the agreement process, which is the actual construction of the product. Now, this agreement process is what solidifies the whole thing. Without without clarity, personal responsibility, and this commitment to partnership, it just becomes transactional. But once you have these four integrated together, it becomes transformational. You do have to realize that everybody, as Colin Powell said, on your team knows who and who is not performing, and they're looking to you as a leader to see what you're going to do about it. And this is your accountability. You have to take accountability to make sure you're doing something about it. Now, there's three main reasons why people fail to perform as you expect. They're unaware of the expectations, they lack the required skill or capacity, or they choose not to. So think of the people in your workplace that are not performing as you expect, and ask yourself, which of the three reasons are they aware of the expectations? And your job is, leaders are accountable to communicate these expectations, both from a values perspective and an operational perspective. Number two, they lack the required skill or capacity. And leaders, positional leaders, are accountable to assess workplace competencies and ensure adequate resources are available, or they choose not to. And leaders are accountable to ensure that you have the right people on the team, and that consequences are very clear with people. When you get into a leadership position, folks, you don't get more power, but you do get more accountability. And here's where those accountabilities lie. Okay, so this is the agreement process that we use. And we have people that have replaced this with performance reviews and performance evaluations, and they only use this system. But you can take whatever system that you have, and as long as you bring an adult, maybe you still are at the point where you have an expectation that you have to do an annual performance review. Well, this can be added to that system. It doesn't have to replace it. And you can bring an adult to adult relationship into any supervisory role that you might have, or management role that you have. It's the attitude that you bring into it that says, you know what, I understand this is a parental model. My commitment is we're going to turn this into an adult to adult relationship. Now, these are the 6 components of any good accountability agreement. You're welcome to use these words. You're welcome to borrow, steal this agreement process. It's a very simple process. You're also welcome to use your own words. Take this and make it meaningful to yourself. But somewhere along the line, you have to have that compelling why. What is your reason for being here? We're going to ask you to set some goals and to have expectations in our relationship, but we got to know why is this job important to you? What matters to you? Why do you come to work? Why do you get out of bed in the morning? What really matters to you? And maybe what matters to them is what's in their personal life. Now they got a reason, because they're going to achieve results and bring value to the organization so that they can be looked after financially and personally in their personal life. Nothing wrong with that. Maybe they've got a personal hobby in their life. I met a lawyer once who played in a band and on the weekend. And the reason he's the reason he practices law so he can really spend all his money on playing in this band, which is where his real love is. So regardless, you just got to have a compelling why. And I suggest you got to have some kind of conversation about that inspires people to be accountable, inspires people to be accountable. It's not just a check off the box here. Now, clarity. What is expected? What's expected in terms of the operations? What's expected in terms of living our values here? And you got to get really crystal clear about what that is. Support requirements. What support is required? Now, this is what holds us together. Your expectations of me are my support to you, my accountability to you. My support requirements to you are your accountabilities to me. And that we make an agreement with each other. What will we promise each other? Consequences. What is important to us? What's important to you? And it is my belief you can make these public, these accountability agreements, when you bring it into an alignment meeting where you have an accountability. Right, tonight we're having a board meeting. I'm a chair on a board in a nonprofit organization. We're having an alignment meeting where each of us have taken our accountabilities, and we're going to sit together tonight and bring those accountabilities out in the open, assess if there's any gaps, who's going to take the gaps, where are gaps, and who's going to take what promises will we make to each other. Well, the consequences, though, so the accountability agreement will be public. Now, this is a volunteer board, so there's no money involved, but the consequences, if money is in part of the equation, that should be confidential. Now, we work in organizations where sometimes you negotiate for, thousands of dollars in stock option. Well, you probably don't have those kind of resources, but so what is important to us? Maybe it's that we have more time away from work. Maybe I want to work virtually and I will achieve the results by working at home, and that we support and be flexible with each other around that. That's where we treat each other as adults. Now, maybe there's some roles that can't be achieved virtually. And then we then we have to negotiate a different agreement. But we just sit down, and this is just a tool to help you negotiate what those agreements are. And then a follow-up. How will we assess and monitor our progress? How often do we need to meet? Maybe immediately we need to meet every other day on this to make sure that we're on track. Or maybe then we move it to once a week, and then we move it to once a month. And then we begin to trust and let go of the consequences there. So I just want to leave you with an example. I was always known, my kids are now launched and they're on their own, but when they were going to school, I was known in our school as the accountability guy. So whenever I came in, and I used to really threaten teachers, because when I'd come in for the parent-teacher conference, they would always say, "Oh, what have I done wrong here?" Because we don't talk to each other until there's an accountability issue. But I would always set this up to say, "No, listen, I'm here to help you succeed." Now, I did learn, you let your kids be in the classroom for a month before you have these conversations. But I'm just giving you a little example about how we've used these agreements. We use them with our kids when they I remember our daughter wanted to get a pet and wanted to get a dog, and she had to write an accountability agreement before she did that, and kept that agreement. So it was a little tool, but I'll just share with you this one tool that we used. So our compelling why, and this is what we presented. We had this written out on a page. Our purpose as parents is to ensure that Chandra is a responsible, contributing citizen who experiences joy and learning in life. Now, this is her grade 4 teacher, okay? And we brought this to her teacher. Chandra, what we're accountable for is Chandra coming to school with a sense of joy and responsibility for herself and her own learning. She understands that education is more than going to school. And Madame Seguin, feeling that her commitment to Chandra's learning is supported by us as parents. That's on us. And she comes to the school learning ready. That's on us. We will promise that she's excited about learning and about school, and she's fed, nourished, and emotionally supported. And we take full responsibility for completing Chandra will take full responsibility for completing all her assignments and meeting the deadlines as outlined by you, the teacher, right? And then this is what we ask from you. Continue to do a superb job of relating, encouraging, and teaching our daughter. Continue to come to the classroom refreshed, ready to teach. I always said my only expectation of teachers is come fresh, come ready to teach. Honesty and openness about her progress with us. Let us know if we're falling down, and provide an educational experience that fits her capacities. And our job is to support you, make sure you're supported in this role, and your job is to come fresh. Let's work together as partners in this process. The consequences is that Chandra will be excited to go to school, at least most days, and enjoy the learning process. Madame will enjoy Chandra's presence in the classroom and feel a sense of accomplishment. And Val and Dave will have a great relationship with Madame Seguin and will continue to speak highly of her as a dedicated professional, and we'll be proud of Chandra in the school that she attends. So it's a tool. It's a transformational tool for these conversations to enrich each other's lives. Okay, that's the reason why we do all this stuff, not just to get a job done. And the follow-up, we'll review this document in conjunction with each student-led conference 3 times a year, and we will meet with the teacher, Madame Seguin, whenever needed to discuss our progress as partners in the education process. So this is how it's meant to be. We're going to turn a relationship with the teacher into a partnership. And this is my job, is everybody on our team, my accountability is that everybody on our team feels that they're partners in building our business together. So with that in mind, I'm going to shut this down. We'll close it off. Again, I want to remind you, there is some space available for our virtual, this is very late notice, but we still have some seats available for our virtual academy. And then our in-person academy is in the spring. And we would just love, if you want to get into this deeper, want to get into this material and want to learn it in the context of a community, truly, sincerely hope you can join us. Okay. And we had an amazing time last week. There's the kind of the agenda. We spent the first half on leadership presence, and then the second half, we talk about leadership practices. All right. With that in mind, I am going to stop sharing, and we will come back, and I will stop the recording here.